Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Mishpatim, and we're going to do Os Yud, section number 10. The Zera Shimshon starts with a Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, so let's jump right in. Gemara de Shabbos, the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos. Omar Rabbi Akiva, in our text of the Gemara, it actually says Omar Rabbi Elazar, so I assume that this is a little typo, a little typographical error here in the text of the Zera Shimshon. So we're going to read it. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said, "B'shah shehikdimu Yisrael naaseh l'nishma." At the moment that the Jewish people said naaseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen, and they put the word naaseh, we will do, first before the word nishma, yotzes baskol, a heavenly voice came out, ve'amra lahem, and said to them, Migilo levonai roz zeh, who revealed this secret to my children, shemal'ache hashares mishtamshin bo, that the ministering angels use. Shenemar, as a pasuk in Tehillim, this is a pasuk from Parak Kuf Gimel in Tehillim, as the pasuk says, Baruch Hashem mal'achov, bless Hashem, his angel, his malachim, and I'll read the Zera Shimshon cuts off the pasuk there, but let me read the rest of the pasuk. Gibore koach, who are mighty in strength, osei divaro, they are doers of Hashem's word, lishmoa bekol divaro, to listen to the voice of his word. So the pasuk in Tehillim is talking about the malachim, and it talks about them doing Hashem's will and then listening to Hashem's will. And of course, we see that idea that is expressed in naaseh, we will do, v'nishma, and we will listen. The same idea is expressed in the pasuk in Tehillim, and the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos is saying that when Klal Yisrael said those words, Hashem recognized it as emulating, so to speak, what the malachim do by putting naaseh before nishma. So the Zera Shimshon is going to ask three questions. Kasha tuva, this is very difficult. De'ech yitachen sheyasu kodem sheyishma'u. How is it possible that Bnei Yisrael could do the mitzvos before hearing the mitzvos? Im lo yodu ma la'asos, if they didn't know what to do. So the Zera Shimshon cuts right to the chase with a very fundamental practical question. How could the Jewish people ever say the words that we will do the mitzvos before we hear the mitzvos? They would have no idea what to do. It should be obvious that first you have to listen to Hashem's commandments and hear them, and only then can you put them into practice, because you will have heard what it is Hashem wants you to do. So that's his first question. How is such a thing possible to say naaseh before nishma? Umahu, question number 2. And what is the meaning of Migilo levonai rozeh? Who revealed this secret to my children? Dema raz shaykh kan. Because how is the term secret relevant here? What exactly was the secret that Hashem was referring to when he said, who revealed this secret to my children? The Ode, in the third and final question, Besamach, if we look at the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos that the Zera Shimshon quoted about naaseh v'nishma, right after that story, the Gemara brings an incident about a heretic making negative remarks and maybe even accusations to Rava about the Jewish people. We'll talk about that narrative in a story in the Gemara in a moment. But let's just finish the question inside. The Od b'samach, and another question is nearby this statement that the Zera Shimshon quoted that he brought down from Masechta Shabbos, b'maseh dehahu mina, where there's an incident with a certain heretic. Ma shayech disaginon bishlei Musa. What is the relevance of the fact that in that story, Rava responds to the heretic and he says, we who act in a way that is shleimus, that is wholehearted and complete in our service of Hashem and sincere in our service of Hashem, will be rewarded. Uva alilusa, but the people who practice deceit and insincerity in their service of Hashem, they will be destroyed. So the Zera Shimshon's question is, what does that story have to do with the Gemara talking about the Bnei Yisrael saying Naaseh v'nishma? Why does the Gemara, right after the Naaseh v'nishma piece, bring in the story of the heretic and Rava? There doesn't seem to be any connection between those things. For us to understand the question, we need to know the incident. So it's a very fascinating and unusual incident. The Gemara tells us over there that a heretic, a min, saw Rava learning Torah, and Rava's learning was so intense that he had placed his hand under his leg and was so focused on the learning that he had tightened his pushing down on his leg, or possibly tightening where the knee, his fingers might have been right behind his knee, and he was squeezing his fingers so hard that he was bleeding. And the heretic saw that Rava didn't even notice that he was bleeding. He wasn't even noticing the pain and the fact that blood was coming out of his hand because he was so tightly wound and so focused on his learning that he didn't notice that. So the heretic was bothered by this and thought this was a absurd kind of situation. And so he went up to Rava and he said, "You people have always been impetuous and thoughtless, reckless. Why? Because you're sitting here and you're so focused on your learning, you don't even realize that you're bleeding. And your ancestors, the Jewish people at Har Sinai, they said, Naaseh v'nishma. They were so reckless and thoughtless that they said, we will do the commandments before we even hear them. And the heretic continued and said, that's obviously a ridiculous thing to do, just like what you're doing, because first a person must listen to what is being his instructions or his commandments, to what is being told to him. And then he can make a decision, and then he should make a decision about whether or not to accept them and to do them. But just to jump right in and say, Naaseh, for the Jewish people to jump right in and say, we'll do it even if we don't know what it is, that was foolish, just like Rava, the heretic said, Rava, just like what you're doing now is foolish. So that's the, so then Rava said back, Rava's response to the min was to quote from a pasuk in Mishlei. And the gist of the pasuk in Mishlei is that people who operate with sincerity and wholeheartedness will be successful, will be rewarded. And people who operate with deceit and insincerity will be destroyed. And Rava was saying, we, Bnei Yisrael, from the beginning when we said Naaseh v'nishma, that's because we were sincere and wholehearted. And today we are still sincere and wholehearted. And that's why I'm so focused on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. I'm so absorbed and intent that I'm not even noticing what happened to my hand. And that brings us, the Jewish people, to success and reward. But you heretics, you will be destroyed because you are insincere. You don't want to fully accept Hashem's Ratzon, Hashem's will, and follow his mitzvos with wholeheartedness. So that's the story. So the Zera Shimshon's question again, his third question is, what does that have to do with what we're trying to teach here? Let's continue. Zera Shimshon begins to answer his questions. V'yesh lomar she'amru b'medrash. We can say that a quote from Chazal from the Medrash Rabbah on Bamidbar, and I'll just pause for a moment here. You can see that two sources are quoted in the parentheses, the Medrash Rabbah and also the Gemara and Baba Kama. If you look at both places, you'll see that apparently the source that the Zera Shimshon is quoting or wants us to focus on is the Gemara and Baba Kama, because here it's a very close rendition to what the Gemara and Baba Kama says, but it departs, it's different in significant ways from what the Gemara, from what the Medrash Rabbah says. So in case you do want to look up the sources, I think you'll see, you'll be better off if you look up the Gemara and Baba Kama, because if you look at the Medrash Rabbah, it's different. It's a little bit different than what the Zera Shimshon is saying here. So let's go weiter. Chazal say al pasuk, on the pasuk asher yaseh osam ha'adam v'chai bahem, that a person, a man, will do the mitzvos and live by them. On that pasuk, the Gemara comments, Yisrael Kohanim v'Leviim lo ne'amar. It doesn't say in the pasuk that when the Jewish people, the Yisraelim and the Kohanim and the Leviim, when they do mitzvos, they will live by them. It doesn't say that. Ella ha'adam. It says when a man does the mitzvos, a person, a human being, not just a Jewish person. Lomar lecha, to say to you, de'afilu goy ve'osek b'Torah, that even if a non-Jew studies the Torah and involves himself deeply in the study of Torah, harehu ki kohen gadol, he can reach the level of a kohen gadol. He can reach the highest a spiritual level amongst the Jewish people, even though he's an Adam, even though he's a regular human being and not a member of Klal Yisrael. Elo bad she'ena mikablim schar kimitzuva ve'oseh. A non-Jew who studies Torah will not receive the reward, the same level of schar, of reward, of a person who is commanded to study Torah and studies Torah. That would not be relevant because a non-Jew has no mitzvah to study Torah, no mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Ela kemisha eno mitzuva ve'oseh. But rather his reward will be like someone who is not commanded to do a mitzvah and nonetheless performs and observes the mitzvah. That person is also rewarded, but not on the same level and not at the same magnitude of a person who's doing a mitzvah that he or she is commanded to do. So that's the Zera Shimshon's first point. Ubeperek hama de avos, in the first parak of Maseches Avos, Tznan, we learn in a Mishnah, al tihiyu ka'avodim hamishamshin al menas lekabel pras. Don't be, this is a teaching of Antignos Ish Socho in the first parak, the third Mishnah of Pirkei Avos. Don't be like a servant who serves his master only in order to receive a reward, but rather be like a servant who serves his master with no thought of the reward. He serves his master out of commitment, out of dedication, out of love, and he's not thinking about the reward that the master will give him. So that's the teaching in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Ki zo eina nikres avoda shlema avoda tama. Because this way, meaning if you serve only because you're focused on the reward, only because of the reward, is not considered an avoda shlema, a complete service, and an avoda tama, a perfect, sincere service. So we see that when we do mitzvos, the focus should not be on the schar, on the reward, and certainly not on the level of reward. That's what the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos teaches us. And this idea also is expressed when Bnei Yisrael said Naaseh v'nishma, udum yolazeh. It's similar to the same point. De'in hachinami shehayu tzarich lahem liyisrael. For it is of course true that Bnei Yisrael first that Bnei Yisrael first had to lishmoa seder avodos v'hamitzvos. First, they had to hear from Hashem the order of the way to serve Him and to do His commandments. And only after hearing that could they actually do the mitzvos. So the Zera Shimshon says it is obvious that when Bnei Yisrael said Naaseh v'nishma, they didn't literally mean we're going to do all the mitzvos before we even hear them. Of course, they had to hear the mitzvos and the commandments before they could put them into effect and observe them. Omnom, however, kavanos Yisrael hayisakach. This is what the intention of Bnei Yisrael was when they said Naaseh v'nishma. Afilu even in lo hayisa nosein lanu schar. Even Hashem, if you wouldn't give us the reward, like someone who hears a commandment and does it. Ela kamisha eno mitzuvah. However, even if you just treated us like someone who hasn't been commanded to do a particular mitzvah, dayenu, that would be enough for us. Let's pause here because the Zera Shimshon has just told us a novel interpretation, a new way of understanding this fundamental phrase of Nasev and Nishma. He says what Bnei Yisrael was saying to Hashem is, even though we're, of course, we're going to listen intently to what Hashem, you teach us about your mitzvos and how you want us to serve you, nonetheless, we want you to know, Naseh, we are willing to we're dedicating ourselves to do your service and your mitzvos as if we hadn't been commanded to do them, as if Nishma will come later, as if us hearing the mitzvos and being commanded to do them will only come at a later point. So treat us ke'eno mitzuvah ve'oseh, like someone who does a mitzvah, even though he or she hasn't been commanded to do it, and we know that that person receives much less schar. And the whole point, according to the Zera Shimshon, was that Bnei Yisrael was making was, we're not focused on the schar. We're not serving you, Hashem, based on the reward. We're not focused on that. We'll take less reward. That's not our issue. Our motivation and our commitment is to do your will, the Ratzon Hashem, not a focus on reward and schar. And that's what Bnei Yisrael really meant, according to the Zera Shimshon, when they said, Na'aseh v'nishma. Continuing, V'zehu so gadol, and this is the great secret, she'malochei hashores mishtamshin bo, that the malachim use, which is the lashon, the language right out of the Gemara and Shabbos that the Zera Shimshon started with, she'heim eino makpidim l'tashlim gemul, because malachim are not concerned about the payment of reward. So Hashem was saying, who taught Klal Yisrael to emulate the malachim in the sense that the malachim serve Hashem without any focus on reward? And so to Klal Yisrael is saying, Nasev and Nishma, we want to do the mitzvos. That's all we care about, not the reward. Continuing, the Iker Haminus, and this issue of heresy, the story of the heretic, the main theme of heresy, Yodua, is known. Sheba machmas davar zeh. It came about because of this thing, this whole idea of reward. Shet saduk ubaisus, because two individuals who were students of Antignos Ish Socho, the man who taught us the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos who was quoted by Pirkei Avos, by Maseches Avos, as teaching his students and teaching us for the generations not to serve Hashem like a servant who wants to be rewarded, who is focused on the reward. So two of his students, Sadok and Baisus, nishtabshu b'mishnah zu. They made an error. They misunderstood this teaching, this Mishnah. And what that refers to is and this explanation is brought in the Avos to Rabbi Nassan, as you'll see, it'll be quoted in the text of the Zera Shimshon in a moment, but just so we understand the concept now. These two students, who not only were regular students, but we are taught that they were two of Antignos Ish Socho's main students who would listen to his teachings and then teach it to students and teach it to other students, and they would spread his teachings to as many people as possible. When they learned this teaching, they said, they took it to mean that there is no reward, not as Antignos Ish Socho meant it and intended it to mean. Of course there is a reward, spiritual reward for doing mitzvos. They said, oh, this must mean there is no reward, rather than don't focus on the reward. There is no reward. And so they said, if there's no reward, no spiritual reward, that means there's no olam haba and there's no techiyas hamesim. And this led them on a terrible, a dangerous path away from the Torah, because they started to teach and say the soul is not immortal. It dies at the end of life. When the body dies, the soul also dies, and there's nothing else. There's no Tchiyas HaMesim, there's no Olam Haba, and there's no spiritual reward. The only reward a person would receive, according to their corrupt teaching, was in this world, in Olam Hazeh. This is the only place and the only forum where Hashem rewards people for doing mitzvos. That is the teaching that they began to spread, and that became a powerful, overwhelmingly powerful minus, heresy amongst the Jewish people. Ul'olam hayumonim es Yisrael. And forever, this was a heresy that spread amongst the Jewish people. V'Rava Heshiv, and Rava replied, Bishlei lehahumina, to this heretic, Anon saginon bishlei Musa. We operate with fullness, with wholeheartedness, with sincerity. V'ovdim lekel ba'ahava rabba v'chule. And we serve Hashem with great love. It's because of our love of Hashem that we're serving him, not our interest in the schar, in the reward. Aval hanoch inshe, but the other people, which was Rava's way of referring to the minim, the heretics, disagu ba'alilusa, who operate with insincerity, with deceit, meaning they go around and act as if they want to do Hashem's will, but really all they care about is reward and schar. V'rotzim lavod al manas lekabel pras, and they want to serve because of the reward that they receive. That's their focus. That's what motivates them. Kesiv behu, it's written about them, v'chule, etc. And that's where the pasuk in Mishlei that we referred to earlier comes in. And Rava and the Zera Shimshon doesn't quote the pasuk in either place, but the pasuk says in Mishlei, again, just to repeat it, that those who operate with sincerity will be led by their wholeheartedness and will be successful. And those who operate with deceit and insincerity will be destroyed. And that was Rava's response to the heretic. V'ayin od la'el. And if you want to know more about this subject, you can look previously al zeh on this topic, the Seder Yisro, Os Yud Beis, on last week's Parsha of Seder Yisro, this past Shabbos' Parsha, in Os Yud Beis in section 12 of the Zera Shimshon's comments. So let's just go back and recap. The Zera Shimshon started with 3 questions, and let's make sure we understand how he answered his 3 questions. Question number 1 was, how is it even possible to do the mitzvos without hearing the mitzvos? So the Zera Shimshon conceded. He said, Inoch Inami, of course, Bnei Yisrael knew they had to hear the mitzvos before they could do the mitzvos. But why? So why did they say Nasev? Why did they put Nasev first before Nishma? Because as the Zera Shimshon explained, because they were saying to Hashem, we want to do the mitzvos. That's our focus, to do the Ratzon Hashem. We're not worried about the reward. We'll take less reward, as if we are doing mitzvos and haven't been commanded to do the mitzvos. The second question was, what was the secret? So the Zera Shimshon explained the secret that was being referred to was the fact that the malachim are paradigms of doing the mitzvos, and not doing the mitzvos, of serving Hashem, focusing on the Ratzon of Hashem without thinking about the schar. And it was that Hashem was saying, how did Bnei Yisrael even know that? How did they know that about the malachim? That's how they operate, that now they too, Klal Yisrael too, is saying Naaseh v'nishman. First, we're focusing on the doing of Hashem's Ratzon. And the third question is, what was the connection between the story of Rava and the Min? And of course, the Zera Shimshon made it clear that the whole point over there was the Min was attacking what he took to be the thoughtlessness and the foolishness of saying Nasev and Nishma. And Rava responded and said, that is what the Jewish people are all about, doing Hashem's will without thought of reward. But you heretics are only focused on reward and schar, and that totally led you astray, just like it all started with Tzadok and Baisus, the Talmidim of Antigno Shisocho, and explains why they misinterpreted his teachings and tragically spread their corrupt teachings to Klal Yisrael. So Be'ezus Hashem, we will use the Zera Shimshon's words to bring more shleimus, more completeness, and more sincerity to our avodas Hashem. Yasher koch to everyone for joining us, and Amir Tashem, God willing, we look forward to learning Zera Shimshon together again next week.